Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Vowing revenge, Iran is on the warpath after a blackout at one of its key nuclear facilities. The rogue nation is accusing Israel of, quote, nuclear terrorism. Well, how does this saber-rattling raise the stakes between the two arch enemies? And could the conflict thwart President Biden's agenda to revive the Iran nuclear deal? Chris Mitchell explores this escalating threat.
Iran is blaming Israel for the attack, and a leading Iranian official is warning of war.
We want to say very frankly to all those who want to implement sabotages on us that if they attempted to start wars, Iran would not keep silent.
According to the New York Times, the power outage at the Natanz nuclear facility set back Iran's nuclear program at least 9 months. Israeli media is reporting the Mossad is behind a cyber attack that damaged advanced centrifuges just hours after they went online. Last July, Iran blamed Israel for an explosion that severely damaged this facility. Sunday's incident raises the stakes in the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran. Another confrontation is taking place on the high seas. Israel attacked an Iranian ship off the coast of Yemen recently, while Iran hit an Israeli vessel a few weeks ago. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu encouraged the Israel Defense Forces to continue its battle against Iran.
The fight against Iran and its proxies, the fight against Iran's nuclear program, the fight against Iran's nuclearization is a huge task. And I wish all of us that you continue on this path and that you continue to keep the sword of David, in your hands.
Here in Israel, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met with both Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Benny Gantz.
The Tehran of today poses a strategic threat to international security, to the entire Middle East, and to the state of Israel.
During our meeting, I reaffirmed to Minister Gantz our commitment to Israel is enduring and it is ironclad.
While the fight between Israel and Iran grows, negotiations in Vienna between Iran and the 5 nations that signed the 2015 Iranian nuclear deal continue. The talks are designed to help the U.S. re-enter the Iranian nuclear deal. Iran demands the U.S. act first by removing sanctions before it will agree to make any moves limiting its nuclear advancement. Last week on Holocaust Remembrance Day, Prime Minister Netanyahu declared Israel would not be bound by any nuclear deal. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we've said many times before, there is a theology that underlines the Iranian party that indicates that before the 12th Imam, the so-called Mahdi, comes back, there has to be chaos. And they will not hesitate to take out several million people with a nuclear explosion in order to bring their theology to pass. So I think Israel is absolutely right to take any kind of preemptive action it needs to keep Iran from having a nuclear facility. Well, in other news, get this, cash payouts to Central American countries to stem the surge at the border. Well, what is that? That's what the Biden administration is now considering. So are Democrats that desperate to continue this fiasco? Ephraim Graham has more.
Pat, call it pay to stay away. The Biden administration is reportedly considering a plan to send money to Central American countries to help address the economic problems leading so many to head to the United States. This move comes as the number of migrants at the border has hit new records. Dale Hurt has the story.
The situation is so bad at the southern border that the Department of Health and Human Services has asked workers from other federal agencies to go to the border to help care for the thousands of illegal immigrant children being held there. The border surge is breaking records. Over 172,000 migrants were stopped at the border last month, the most in 20 years. And almost 21,000 unaccompanied minors are now in federal custody, the most ever. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says we're seeing the consequences of the Democrats' rhetoric on open borders and Joe Biden's policies.
If you go back to the Democrat presidential debates, every single one of the Democrat candidates said if they are elected, they will have open borders and they will be giving things for free to anybody coming across the border. This problem will continue to get worse because of the policies that have been adopted by the Biden administration.
Abbott points out that even some Democrats are pushing back against the Biden White House. And he says what would stop the surge would be a return to the border policies of the Trump administration. Instead, Reuters reports the Biden administration is now considering cash payouts to some Central American nations to try to improve economic conditions to help stem the surge at the border. Republican House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy blasted the idea, tweeting, "President Biden wants to try and buy our way out of his border crisis with taxpayer money. The administration is spending $60 million a week and now wants to launch a cash transfer program in Central America. This insults millions of Americans who are out of work in our country." And while Joe Biden put Kamala Harris in charge of fixing the border crisis nearly 3 weeks ago, she still hasn't held a press conference or even visited the border to see what's happening there firsthand. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Many are waiting for the vice president's visit to the border. Pat?
Well, they refused to acknowledge that there was a crisis. They wouldn't say it was a crisis. Well, they're just some people coming across the border seeking a better life. Now it's a crisis. Not only are they finding gang members, they're actually finding terrorists from places like Yemen who are coming across the border because it's wide open. And these people are being picked up and dumped into the central part of the United States. They're being bussed into various congressional districts or counties, and they are a threat to our nation. And until the people recognize that Trump was right, but they will not acknowledge that Trump is right because they have to repudiate Trump. And as a result, we got this chaos coming in, hundreds of thousands of people thronging to get into our country. Ephraim?
Republican politicians and conservatives are blasting President Biden's new commission to study overhauling the U.S. Supreme Court. The bipartisan group announced Friday will spend the next 6 months examining the structure of the high court.
They will also be looking at the court's role in the constitutional system, the length of service and turnover of justices on the court, the membership and size of the court.
That last point about the size of the court is a hot-button political issue, as many Republicans have accused liberals of wanting to pack the court, adding more justices to the court so they can get the rulings that they want. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell called the commission a direct assault on our nation's independent judiciary and another sign of the far left's influence over the Biden administration. McConnell added constitutional scholars and Supreme Court justices have repeatedly said 9 is a good number for members of the court. And Justice Stephen Breyer warned against the idea of adding new members just last week, as Senator Biden himself once called the idea of packing the court while he was a senator boneheaded. A New York Times Siena College poll last October found 58% oppose increasing the size of the court, while only 31% support it. Pat?
Well, you remember in history what this all came about. Franklin Roosevelt was president. He was a Democrat. He had a solid majority in the House and the Senate of Democrats. So he thought he could do what he wanted to do. And he began the National Recovery Act. He had a number of projects that he thought were important to the health of America. But the Supreme Court was very conservative in those days, and they said certain of the things you're trying to do are unconstitutional. So Roosevelt said, well, I'll fix you. I need 5 justices, and I'll put 5 in the court. And therefore, instead of having 9 members, I'll have 14 members, and these 5 will counteract the 5 that have been voting against me. He had everything going for it, and the country reacted in a furor against it. His own party wouldn't do it, and it was voted down. That's when he had everything going for him, and yet at the same time, America wouldn't stand for it. Now we've got the same thing coming up again. You know, it has been, the Supreme Court has been the plaything of the left. They have gotten, the court in its liberal majority has given the left almost everything it asked for. Things they couldn't get through the ballot box, they got through the courts. So all they had to do is take 5 people and get them on their side, and maybe all they'd have to do is win one federal case somewhere and then use that to build on something else, then get a circuit court ruling, and then we'd go to the Supreme Court and they had it all fixed. That's how you got Roe versus Wade and these other rulings. Now, there's a conservative majority on the court, and the left doesn't like it. So the American people, I don't think, will stand for court packing now like they certainly didn't do it for Roosevelt, and they shouldn't do it now. Ephraim?
Pat, in a 5-4 ruling, the Supreme Court told California Friday it cannot enforce COVID-related restrictions that have limited worship groups in homes, including Bible studies and prayer meetings. It is the latest ruling from the High Court in a string of cases that have barred officials from enforcing such restrictions. California was planning to drop the regulations, but the court pointed out the state could have reinstated them at any time. Unrest in Minnesota after a traffic stop turned into a deadly confrontation. Police in the city of Brooklyn Center said officers stopped a driver Sunday afternoon, then tried to arrest him when they found out he had an outstanding warrant. But he got back in the car and drove away. An officer fired and hit him, but the car kept going and crashed into another vehicle several blocks away. Relatives have identified the driver as Dante Wright, a 20-year-old black man. The death sparked protests into the early hours of this morning. Demonstrators gathered shortly after the shooting, with some jumping on police cars and confronting officers. All of this coming as Minneapolis is already on edge from the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin in the death of George Floyd last May. After massive eruptions from a volcano, the Caribbean island of St. Vincent was hit with a major power outage. The eruptions from the La Sofia volcano began Friday. Smoke and ash covered the island, bringing with it a strong sulfur smell as the ash covered everything, getting into homes, cars, and noses, forcing people to evacuate their homes and seek shelter.
This is the first time I am experiencing a volcanic eruption. I am scared. I'm just hoping for the best so that everything can be over, so I can go back home.
Around 16,000 people live in the red zone near the volcano in the island's northern region. They were forced to evacuate, though there have been no reports of casualties thus far. Pat?
Thank you very much. Well, there will be volcanic eruptions. That's part of the nature of the earth we live on. So it's a shame to be near them, but some of the other hot volcanoes are being close to eruption, including Mount Etna, which is the one that swamped Pompeii years and years ago.